The GroupBy function is one of the newest functions in the Excel toolbox, and its job is to allow us to create what would normally be created through a pivot table through a function instead. So for example, let's say you have a basic data table and you wanted to summarize this data. You'd probably want to do something like create a total sales by product so that all of the Cloudburst sales, all of the Breakpoint sales, and all of the Jubilee sales could be totaled together. And the easiest possible way to do that, let's not get it twisted here, everybody, is still to do a pivot table. If you go to the Insert tab at the top of your screen, you'll see the very first button on the left side of the Insert ribbon is the Pivot Table button. And it allows you to create that summary through simple drag and drop, checkboxes, etc. But if you ever looked at a pivot table and said to yourself, you know what, I could probably build something more specific that I need to have custom functionality that also happens to be done through a function, so it doesn't always have to be refreshed, and so that it can feed into any chart type in the world, then maybe you need the GroupBy function. The structure of the GroupBy function goes like this. = GroupBy, and then you specify which column or columns are going to be the ones that are used for the categorization. They're called the row fields. So this is something like the product, the team, the department, etc. Then after a comma, we have what is the column that is going to be used as the value to be summarized, whether that summary is done through sum or average, max, min, counting, etc. And then finally, the last thing that is required is what function you'd like to apply. This is kind of an interesting space because technically this allows you to apply any lambda function that you want to the value column. But I assume most people will instead just want something simple like sum, average, etc. So you can just specify the name of that function if you like as well. Then there are optional fields for does your data have headers? Do you want there to be grand totals and subtotals in the report? What column would you like to sort by? Do you have an array of cells that you want to filter by? And finally, is there a special relationship between any of those category columns, or are they disconnected from one another? Here, I'll be using things like headers, totals, and sorting, but we won't be getting into the filter section, nor will we be applying a specific lambda function, instead using one of the simple out-of-the-box tools. So that we can compare and contrast, as you can see here, I have a small data set. I'm going to click onto that data set, and I'm going to start by clicking on the Insert tab and clicking on Pivot Table, and choosing to put this pivot table that's in this set of cells here into the existing workbook, and I'll put it over here to the right-hand side and click OK. And if I wanted, for example, broken down by department, how much we're spending, you can see here that we can in fact get a total transaction amount based on the department. Easy enough. So how is this different from the GroupBy function? If I click into cell H5 here, and I go to the Formulas tab at the top of the screen, I'll find Lookup and Reference on the drop-down menu here, and I'll find GroupBy. Now, this is another example of a function that I do not often use the dialog box for, especially here because you're going to see that something that is entirely fine to do is actually treated as if it's an error in the dialog box. We'll see that here in just a second. So I'm going to click on GroupBy here, pop open this dialog box, and we say to ourselves, well, the row fields, how we are categorizing that data, that was the department column. So I'm going to highlight the department column, and in this instance, I'm going to highlight from D6 to D637 here. And then the values field, I'm going to highlight from F6 to F637. So we have all the departments and their matching transaction amounts. Here we could have highlighted from D5 and F5, including the headers, but I'm not going to do that just now. And then this is the part that really frustrates me personally. We can use any of a number of different functions simply by their name by coming in here and, for example, typing in SUM. But interestingly, when I click outside of that, you see here, it says value error message. So immediately you are assuming that this is going to break. But the reality of the situation is it's not going to break. I click OK, and sure enough, it has created everything that I need except for, let's think this through, we have administration at the top at $570,000, down through the total at the bottom at $9.25 million. But we don't have the data headers up here at the top. And as you saw, it was really strange to put the sum function in there. So I'm going to come back here and remove that function, and I'm going to do it again, but this time I'm going to do it without the dialog box. I'm simply going to click on cell H5 and type in =GroupBy. Now the first question is row fields. I made a note of this earlier. I selected from D6 to the bottom. This time I'm going to select from D5 to the bottom for my row fields. And then after a comma, I'm going to select F5 to the bottom with my values. So D5 through D637, F5 through F637, comma, and then you notice here how the dialog box is not helping me in the same way that typing it directly into the cell is. As you can see right now, I can simply scroll down this list, finding the function I want to use, including at the very bottom here, the ability to create a custom lambda function. But I'm just going to come up right up to the top and select sum and press the tab key. And then after a comma, it asks me the question, should we include the field headers? Or are there field headers and should we include them? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, yes, I do want to see the field headers and they exist. So I'll press tab here, selecting 3 for my field headers. Then comma. Here you see that it's asking whether there should be grand totals, subtotals, and whether they should be at the top or the bottom. So in that previous instance, I left it empty. That defaulted to showing the grand total. I will put in a 1 here and press the tab key. And then comma, the sort order. Now the sort order is about which column is doing the sorting. So if left empty, this would be the first column. If we type in a 1, again, it's going to sort by the first column. And there is no filter array or field relationship, so I close the parentheses and hit enter. And here we see department and transaction amount at the top of the data table that's being created. And I can format those a little bit here, make it a little bit more pleasant to look at. And of course, my total is down here at the bottom. As we see here, the column that's being used as the sort is the first column. If we come back here and we say, actually, I would like to sort based on the second column, I'm going to put a 2 instead of the 1. And you see there that it's putting it in numeric order. Now again here, I look at this and I think to myself, maybe this isn't quite right because I would prefer to see the biggest numbers on top. In that instance, what you want to do is put a negative symbol in front of whatever number you use for the sort order. So here I'm going with a -2. Please sort by the transaction amount, but put the biggest on top. And again, I hit enter, and there it is. I have my transaction amounts. I have them in descending order till you get to the bottom down here. And this is functionally the same thing that I get out of the pivot table on the right side. The big difference is here. Item number 1, if the data were to change, let me go over here to this finance department transaction amount of $10,000. And if we take a second, finance right here is $542,747. Again, $542,747. Now let's see what happens when I change this amount from 10,000 to, let's say, 2.5 million. Now again, watch finance in both of these two tables. When I hit enter on my keyboard, instantly the finance department comes to the top at $3 million in transactions. But over here in the pivot table, the finance department has not been updated. So when we use a function rather than the pivot table, functions do not need to be explicitly refreshed and updated. And item number 2 is that if I were to ever click on a pivot table like this one on the right, go to the pivot table analyze tab at the top of the screen and click on to pivot chart, I want you to notice that down here on the left-hand side, there are some interesting function types, like tree map, for example. And if I click here on tree map, I think to myself, yeah, maybe I would like to show the data that I have in my pivot table as a tree map. It tells you that this data cannot be used to create a tree map. And this is because the chart types of tree map, sunburst, and a few others are using a newer charting engine rather than something like the column chart, which is basically been around since the dawn of time. But when I click on something that's generated by a function here on the left-hand side, and I go to Insert at the top of my screen, and I decide that I would like to create a tree map chart, it does not hesitate. I can absolutely create a tree map chart using the data that's in front of me.